The autumn wind carried dust across the Montana plains as Jacob McKenna sat at the corner table of the Silver Spur Saloon, his weathered hands holding cards he barely cared about. At 43, he'd spent the better part of 2 decades working his ranch alone, the isolation carving lines into his sun-darkened face that made him look older than his years. He came to town once a month for supplies, and occasionally, like tonight, he'd stop at the saloon not because he enjoyed drinking or gambling, but because the silence of his ranch sometimes pressed too heavily against his chest. The poker game had been going for hours. Jacob was neither winning nor losing spectacularly, which suited him fine. Across from him sat Vernon Hastings, a railroad man with slicked back hair and a diamond stickpin that caught the lamplight. Vernon had been drinking heavily, his bets becoming increasingly erratic as the night wore on. "I'll raise you," Vernon slurred, pushing a stack of coins forward. Then, with a theatrical gesture, he added, "And I'll throw in the Chinaman's daughter. She's in the wagon outside." The table went quiet. Jacob looked up from his cards, his gray eyes narrowing. "What are you talking about?" Vernon laughed, a sound without humor. "Bought her off a labor crew heading back to California. They said she was useless, couldn't even carry water properly. Cost me $20, biggest waste of money I ever spent. She's yours if you win this hand." Jacob felt something cold settle in his stomach. A person isn't a stake in a card game. "She's Chinese," Vernon said, as if this explained everything. "Worthless as dirt. No family, no prospects. I was going to leave her in the next town anyway. At least this way I might recoup my losses." The other men at the table shifted uncomfortably. This was 1891, and while such attitudes were shamefully common, something about Vernon's casual cruelty made even these hardened men uneasy. Jacob looked at his cards, then back at Vernon's flushed face. He was holding a strong hand, 3 kings and a pair of 10s. "Fine," Jacob said quietly, "but if I win, I'm taking her somewhere safe, not keeping her like property." Vernon waved dismissively. "Do whatever you want with her. Call." Jacob laid down his full house. Vernon stared at the cards, then threw his own hand down in disgust. A pair of 7s and nothing else. He'd been bluffing. Without another word, Vernon stood up, swayed slightly, and gestured toward the door. "She's in the wagon out front, the gray one." Jacob gathered his modest winnings and walked out into the night, his heart heavy with anger and something else he couldn't quite name. The street was dark, except for the pools of light spilling from saloon windows. He found the gray wagon easily enough, and there, sitting in the back with her arms wrapped around her knees, was a young woman. She couldn't have been more than 19 or 20. Her dark hair was pulled back in a simple braid, and she wore a plain cotton dress that had seen better days. When she saw Jacob approaching, she didn't look up, didn't acknowledge him at all, as if she'd learned that making herself invisible was the safest course of action. "Miss," Jacob said softly, "my name is Jacob McKenna. I just won you in a card game, which is about the most shameful sentence I've ever had to speak. You're free to go wherever you want, and I'll give you money for passage anywhere you'd like, or—" He hesitated. "You can come to my ranch. I have a spare room. You'd have your own space, your own privacy. I could use help with the household tasks, and I'd pay you fair wages. But the choice is entirely yours." For the first time, she looked at him. Her eyes were dark and intelligent, holding a wariness that came from hard experience. When she spoke, her English was accented but clear. "Where would I go? I have no family, no money. Every town I've been through, people look at me like I'm dirt on their shoes. I'm not going to pretend I understand what that's like," Jacob said. "But I promise you this, if you come to my ranch, you'll be treated with respect. You'll have your own room with a lock on the door. You'll eat the same food I eat. You'll be paid for your work. And if at any point you want to leave, I'll take you to town and help you get wherever you want to go." She studied him for a long moment, and Jacob forced himself to stand still under her scrutiny, to let her see whatever she needed to see. Finally, she gave a small nod. "My name is Mei Lin. I will come to your ranch." The ride back took most of the night. Jacob had brought his supply wagon, and he made a comfortable space for Mei Lin among the sacks of flour and sugar. He didn't try to make conversation, sensing that she needed time and space to process what had happened. When they finally reached the ranch at dawn, the first light was painting the eastern sky in shades of gold and pink. The ranch house was modest but well built, a 2-bedroom structure with a kitchen, a main room, and a small cellar. Jacob had built it himself 12 years ago when he'd first claimed this land. He showed Mei Lin to the spare bedroom, which he'd been using mostly for storage. "I'll clear this out today," he said. "For now, you can rest. There's water in the pitcher, and I'll make breakfast in about an hour if you're hungry." Over the following weeks, a routine developed. Jacob cleared out the spare room and built Mei Lin a proper bed frame, even adding a small bookshelf at her request. He installed a lock on her door as promised and gave her the only key. Mei Lin took over the cooking and helped with the household tasks, but Jacob was careful to treat it as a partnership rather than servitude. He paid her wages every week, keeping careful records in a ledger he showed her so she could verify every penny. At first, Mei Lin was quiet, speaking only when necessary. But as the weeks turned into months, Jacob began to notice small changes. She hummed while she cooked. She asked questions about the ranch, about the cattle, about the land. One day, he found her in the barn, gently stroking the nose of his oldest mare, Buttercup, and talking to the horse in Chinese. The mare, normally skittish with strangers, stood perfectly still, as if she understood every word. Winter came hard that year. The first major snowstorm hit in November, transforming the landscape into an endless expanse of white. Jacob went out twice a day to check on the cattle and ensure they had access to the winter feed. On the third day of the storm, he came back to the house half frozen, his coat thick with ice. Mei Lin took one look at him and sprang into action. She had already boiled water, and she made him sit by the fire while she brought him hot tea and wrapped blankets around his shoulders. Her hands were gentle but efficient as she checked his fingers and ears for frostbite. "You could have died out there," she said, and there was something in her voice that made Jacob look up in surprise. It was concern, genuine and unguarded. "The cattle needed tending," he said, "but I appreciate your worry." "I will go with you tomorrow," she announced. "2 sets of eyes are better than one, and you need someone to make sure you come back." Jacob started to protest, but the determined set of her jaw told him he'd lose this argument. The next morning, bundled in his spare coat and wearing 2 pairs of socks, Mei Lin trudged through the snow beside him. She proved to be remarkably capable, her small frame hiding a strength forged by years of hard labor. More than that, she noticed things he might have missed: a broken fence post, a calf separated from its mother, a weak spot in the barn roof. As winter deepened, they fell into an easy partnership. In the evenings, after the chores were done, they'd sit by the fire. Jacob taught Mei Lin to read English better, using his small collection of books. In return, she taught him phrases in Cantonese and told him stories of her childhood in Guangdong province, before her family had sent her to America with promises of opportunity that had turned out to be lies. "I was supposed to work in a merchant's house," she said one night, staring into the flames. "Instead, I was sold to a labor camp, then to a restaurant, then to Vernon, each place worse than the last. Everyone wanted to own me, to use me. No one asked my name or cared if I was hungry or tired. Jacob felt anger rise in his chest, not at her, but at the cruelty of the world that had brought her to this point. "I'm sorry that happened to you. You deserved better. You deserve better now." She looked at him then, really looked at him, and something passed between them that neither was quite ready to name. Spring arrived with a rush of meltwater and new grass. The ranch came alive with activity as calves were born and the cattle were moved to better pastures. Mei Lin was out every day, working alongside Jacob. She learned to ride, taking naturally to it in a way that surprised them both. She also started a garden, planting vegetables and herbs, some familiar to Jacob and some he'd never seen before. One afternoon in May, while they were mending a fence together, Mei Lin said, "I've been thinking about what you said the night we met, about me being free to go whenever I wanted." Jacob's hands stilled on the fence post. His heart sank, but he kept his voice steady. "Of course. If you want to leave, I'll take you to town tomorrow, or Helena, if you prefer a bigger city." "That's not what I meant," she said. She was looking out at the mountains in the distance, her profile backlit by the afternoon sun. "I've been thinking that I don't want to leave. This is the first place I've ever felt like I could breathe, like I was a person instead of a thing. You've never once made me feel small or worthless. You've treated me with more kindness and respect than anyone in my life. You are a person," Jacob said firmly. "You always were. Anyone who treated you otherwise was a fool." She turned to face him then, and there were tears in her eyes. "I know that now. You showed me that, and I want to stay, Jacob, not as your employee, but as your partner, in every way." Jacob felt his throat tighten with emotion. Over the past months, he'd come to care for Mei Lin deeply, but he'd been afraid to say anything, afraid she might feel obligated because of their circumstances. "Mei Lin, I don't want you to feel like you owe me anything." "I don't feel obligated," she said. "I feel grateful, but more than that, I feel happy. For the first time in years, I wake up happy, and it's because of you, because of this life we've built together. Don't you feel it too?" He did. God help him, he did. "Yes," he said simply. "I've come to care for you more than I have words to express, but I need you to be absolutely certain. The world isn't kind to couples like us. People will talk, they'll judge. Let them." Mei Lin said with a fierce light in her eyes, "I survived labor camps and cruelty and Vernon Hastings. I can survive small-minded gossip. The question is, can you?" Jacob laughed, surprised by the sound of it. "I've been alone on this ranch for 20 years. I think I've proven I don't care much what people think." They were married in June by a traveling minister who happened through the territory. It was a simple ceremony with no guests, just the two of them and the minister standing in the afternoon sunshine. Jacob had never been particularly demonstrative, but when he kissed his bride, he poured into it all the tenderness and love he'd been holding back for months. True to Mei Lin's prediction, there was talk in town. Some people refused to do business with Jacob. Others made cruel comments when they thought he couldn't hear. But there were also those who surprised him, the widow Henderson, who brought Mei Lin a quilt as a wedding gift, young Tom Bradley at the general store, who always made sure to greet Mrs. McKenna with respect, even old Doc Morrison, who told Jacob he was a lucky man to have found such a capable and intelligent partner. The ranch prospered over the next few years. Mei Lin had a head for numbers and took over managing the books, discovering ways to save money and increase profits that Jacob had never considered. She also expanded the garden into a full vegetable operation, selling produce in town and gaining a reputation for the best tomatoes and squash in the territory. But more than the financial success, the ranch became a home in a way it had never been when Jacob lived alone. There was laughter now, and conversation. There were shared meals and shared dreams. Mei Lin learned to play the harmonica Jacob had inherited from his father, and on summer evenings they'd sit on the porch while she played and he sang old songs in his rough voice. They weathered the hard times together too. A drought in their third year together nearly broke them, but Mei Lin's careful management of their resources saw them through. When Jacob was thrown from a horse and broke his leg, Mei Lin ran the ranch single-handedly for 6 weeks, proving she knew every aspect of the operation as well as he did. On their 5th anniversary, as they sat together watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant colors, Jacob took Mei Lin's hand. "I need to tell you something," he said. "That night at the saloon, when Vernon said you were worthless, part of me wanted to believe I was doing a good deed, rescuing you. But the truth is, you saved me just as much as I saved you. Maybe more." Mei Lin squeezed his hand. "We saved each other," she said simply. "That's how love works, isn't it? It's not one person lifting the other up. It's both people growing together toward the light." "When did you get so wise?" Jacob asked, smiling. "I was always wise," she replied with mock severity. "You just didn't notice because you were distracted by my excellent cooking." Jacob laughed, the sound carrying across the plains where the cattle grazed and the grass grew green, and the home they'd built together stood solid against the sky. He thought about that night 5 years ago, about the poker game that had seemed like such a dark moment, and he marveled at how the worst of circumstances could lead to the best of outcomes when people chose kindness over cruelty, respect over exploitation, love over indifference. Mei Lin had never been worthless. She had always been precious, a pearl of great price, even when the world couldn't see it. And Jacob, the lonely rancher who had won a woman in a card game, had done the one thing that mattered. He'd recognized her humanity, her dignity, her worth. And in doing so, he'd discovered his own. As the stars began to emerge in the darkening sky, they sat together in comfortable silence, two people who had found in each other not just companionship, but home. The land stretched out before them, full of promise and possibility, and whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. Equal partners, true friends, and deeply, enduringly in love.